think Prince Andrew has showed a sense of entitlement throughout all of this, which is so detached from reality, so detached seemingly from royal reality, never mind our reality as ordinary citizens in this country.
So 9 people are in hospital with life-threatening injuries after the mass stabbing on a train bound for London King's Cross last night. 2 arrests have been made in connection with the attack. British Transport Police declared a major incident following the stabbings, and counter-terrorism policing have been supporting their investigations. We're expecting a statement at the scene within the next hour. But I think, Paul, Christine, we'll start with this. Paul, like many of us, when you saw what happened yesterday, just filled with absolute horror for every single person who was on that train yesterday.
It's unimaginable. It really is. It just sends chills down my spine. I mean, because Ben of Exchequer, the local MP, was talking about it's a semi-rural area. I've been on busy trains all week this week, and I'm trying to put my mind into what would happen if people tried to get away from those busy carriages in that fear, in the fear of what's happened. So. These are one of these things. I don't know where you go with it, because you can't sit there and have some sort of security tighter system. Simon Calder was talking about Eurostar, but you just never get people moved around if you had that on every single train line. I really hope that it's great that the services, the police and the emergency services have done what they've done. We do need more information. I think the quicker we can get information afloat of what happened, that will not allow people to start speculating on social media in particular, and the wider community unrest that we've seen in other horrific surprise attacks.
Yeah, because Christine, there are sort of lots of things happening at the same time. First of all, digesting the horror of what happened, this very uncomfortable period where we don't have all of the detail, and then the further questions about what that does mean for security on trains, even if the question has to be asked there, because we might say that this is an open system. We don't want to. Callum, remind me of the phrase that Chip Chapman used earlier.
About the dread and the threat. So threat, inflation and dread hazard were the 2 phrases.
Which can happen after. Christine, we are particularly in the sort of most uncomfortable moment of this story.
We are, you're absolutely right. We don't know what has happened. And we're all just, like Paul, horrified at the thought of what went on that train. And the emergency services did a fantastic job. And actually, and the railway company as well, getting the train stopped and getting our police on. I was actually on a train on Friday night where police boarded it when we stopped. I was actually getting off at that station because there'd been an incident on board. And I think now about how crowded that train was and how difficult it was to move about, to get up and go to the toilet or to go and buy a cup of coffee or something like that. And then you put yourself in the position where people are trying to escape from someone with a knife, attacking randomly. And it must just have been horrific. But how we overcome that, I really don't know, because like Paul says, how do you make railway stations, open places secure? How do you stop people getting on trains, the tube, the buses? You want the country to move freely. You want people to be safe. I don't know what the answer to this is. And I think we're going to have to be careful not to just have a knee-jerk reaction to it, because it is horrific. And our thoughts are all surely with the people who've been hurt in this, but we have to be very careful that we don't speculate and get carried away.
Exactly. And as we have mentioned this morning, mercifully, something like this happening is extremely rare. We do not know who the suspects are or anything about their motivation. So I think in lieu of that knowledge, we should move on.
Indeed. And let's talk about Sunday Times revelations that Andrew Windsor erased specific mentions of Jeffrey Epstein's victims in past statements from Buckingham Palace, that I guess really it's implied we're going to be some sort of support for survivors of abuse. I think there's a couple of things to consider on Andrew this morning, Paul. Let's start first of all with this revelation. Why on earth did Andrew have any influence over what was going in Buckingham Palace statements? What does it say about him, and what does it say about the King?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there are often occasions that we've seen in the last few decades when the royal family just looked in on itself and been very introspective and read the country absolutely wrong. I remember
Yeah.
in the time after Princess Diana died and all the time around the It's a Royal Knockout, things are, one incredibly important, one slightly, more jokey and ridiculous. But it's just shows a sense of entitlement, and I think Prince Andrew has showed a sense of entitlement throughout all of this, which is so detached from reality, so detached seemingly from royal reality. Never mind our reality as ordinary citizens in this country. But I think that it's good that the king has been decisive in his language when he stripped away Prince Andrew's titles properly this time, acknowledging the victims full on, because this is the third time in a row that we've been speaking about Prince Andrew, and we should be. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be, but it shows that actually it's taken this long for the royal family to really kick in
Yeah.
and detach themselves from him.
Christine, I'm interested in your take on our other consideration this morning, which is whether MPs and Parliament has actually been too deferential to the royal family, in this case specifically, but maybe there's a bit of a track record of that too, and whether that's something that needs addressed at this point.
That's something I think it's for Parliament to discuss and decide. I don't really want to get into that at the moment, because I think what worries me most about this is the fact that we are all ignoring the victims. We seem to have made this story about the people who are accused. Jeffrey Epstein, I accept as, because he committed suicide. He is, if you like, beyond reach. But I do think that we are forgetting the scale of this issue, that we are not paying sufficient attention to the victims. We're not doing enough to highlight how this was allowed to happen, how Epstein was allowed to get away with what he got away with, and Ghislaine Maxwell as well, that we should be looking at that and we should be investigating that. And I think we have somehow managed to move away from thinking about the victims about this and the need to address this problem. What is wrong in society that this was allowed to happen? Now, I think this week the King has been absolutely right. And I think the language in his statement was very telling, because he talks specifically about the victims in this. And that is what I think we need to be focusing on now.
Yeah, but it's the Lib Dems, isn't it, that we're calling for the Crown Estate and indeed for Andrew to be brought forward to give evidence under oath. And then we've got questions in the Sunday Times today about Andrew making 15 million quid from selling what was a wedding present from Queen Elizabeth, a home. So it does parliamentary scrutiny has to be a part of this conversation. And I take your point. We must remember the victims, and we have been remembering the victims over the course of the weekend. But
parliamentary scrutiny has to be always an issue. And I think that Ed Davey has talked about the need for greater transparency and examining all aspects of finances, and that's absolutely fine. But I think when we're talking about this, when we're specifically talking about this subject, we need to remember that it's not just about allegations. It's about supporting the victims and looking about what is wrong in our society, that violence against women and girls, abuse of women and girls seems to be so endemic, and for a long time seems to, society's almost turned a blind eye to it. That is not acceptable, and we need to be addressing that.
And Parliament could lead the charge in that, in essence. Paul, I wonder if you agree with Christine. And right now, there is some parliamentary pressure. I mean, it's the Commons Public Accounts Committee that have already asked a series of questions to the Crown Estate about the arrangement that meant Andrew could live at Royal Lodge rent-free. Now we've had these further details, as Callum mentioned, of this property being sold for £15 million that Andrew never paid for nor paid rent for. Where, Paul, do you see the role of Parliament in actually trying to get some answers to those questions, and then maybe justice for some of those victims?
No, I don't have a firm view here. I must admit, I'm sort of split either way, because you've got His Majesty's government, you've got His Majesty's loyal opposition. They are there on the beck and call of the royal family, which is where the tradition comes, or the king, which is where the tradition comes from, that you don't speak about the royal family in Parliament. I would go as far as to say that you should be holding them to account on taxpayers' money. Now that, since those traditions first started, the Crown Estate is funded in a very different way. If it's about taxpayers' money, if it's a direct thing between the government and royal family, and taxpayers and royal family, that's one thing. Speculating on their family affairs, and if it's a wedding gift and he sold it, that's very bad taste. But if it's not impacted on taxpayers, I don't really want to see a load of parliamentarians wringing their hands and pontificating just to grab a few headlines.
Yeah. I think Paul's absolutely right. I think we do need scrutiny of the taxpayers' money and how it's spent. And I don't think anyone would question that. I really don't. But I do think that, Parliament has a lot of important things to do. Internal matters that, as Paul says, are family matters, are different from taxpayers' money and what has gone on with Epstein. They're completely different things.
Fair, understood. So that kind of separation. Paul, just before we move on, do you expect we'll learn more about Andrew? You've spoken on this programme before about a trade mission specifically that you were on, that he was on as well. In fact, over the course of this weekend, others have added some really quite colourful detail to that particular trade trip and the way that...
Well, to be fair, it was two separate trips, but it was to the same country, and but I was learning about it from the people that were on that were involved in that. But you're right, Andrew Lowney's come out with a book and about it, which has detailed a lot more salacious revelations from there, which is horrendous. I mean, can you imagine being the Queen, as was at the time, if she knew about any of this, how she was dealing with this sort of thing? And there are wayward sons and there are wayward sons. This is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Never complain, never explain it.
Earlier on the programme, the economist Daniel Susskind told us about his proposals in the Sunday Times today for a braver budget. He said it was a radical plan that included, controversially, ending the triple lock on pensions. Paul, the case he was making is that what the Chancellor's got to do, he believes, to actually genuinely engineer growth is going to be a very hard political sell to her own party.
And I think this is part of the problem. I've talked a lot about the fact that the Labour Party always talk about 14 years of Tory government. Well, they've had 14 years to think about this and what they're going to do differently. And David Susskind says that there is a plan there about growth, but for me it just feels inadequate and incoherent. I think Labour, when you talk about the Workers' Rights Bill, they're very much too in hoc with the unions to be able to and with their traditions to be able to pivot and actually see the world from what it is and how they're going to chase growth properly. So I agree with actually 4 out of 5 things that David Susskind was talking about. I agree with the fact that we should get rid of the triple lock. It's something that actually both parties are just chasing the elderly vote at the expense of younger votes, because it's just increasing intergenerational unfairness as well as a problem on finances. Net zero has been going down the wrong alley. We should be aiming for net zero, but through technological and innovation advances, not just punishing customers. We should be encouraging people back into the workplace, so reforming welfare properly. The only thing I would disagree with him when he talks about the fact that we should be moving back towards a customs union with the EU. Yes, have a closer relationship with them, but not a customs union, because otherwise all you're making it slightly easier to do business with a flatlining economy, but you're actually cutting out the ability to do decent business with the Asian tiger economies, where all of the growth is going to be over the next few decades.
Christine, did you agree with his sort of radical plan? Would you be able to vote for a system that said, OK, we won't continue with the pensions triple lock, we will push back the timelines for net zero, and also will delay changing those upcoming rights for workers, because first and foremost, the priority has to be growth?
I would find it very difficult because you're talking there about basic principles that people believe in, particularly when you talk about workers' rights. You have examples every day of people having to fight for their rights and defend them. And what we don't want is to go backwards in society. There are things he says that I agree with. The triple lock, that's a difficult one because that was a Liberal Democrat policy. That is that was one of the things that we were proud of in the coalition and has persisted. And you have to look at what it replaced and think what would replace it. Would we go back to the days when pensioners were expected to live on a pittance, and they got 75 pence, legendarily in one budget as an annual increase. So that is just, that to me, that you can't look at those principles and not think about what they would do to society. But where I do agree with them is that we need to have more investment in ideas, where the American economy has surpassed ours, he points out, is in its investment in new ideas, in technology, in innovation that leads to growth. And we haven't done that. And we also, I do agree that we need the customs union. We do need a customs union with the EU, because Brexit is the thing which has probably done more damage to our economy even than COVID.
But Christine, what you've identified is that he kept using this word tension, Daniel, when we spoke to him, is that idea between the principle of the policy and the actual practical reality, which he says the two actually, let's say if it's over the pensions triple lock, don't complement each other in tandem. It's not working.
Well, no, that it depends how you look at it. You have to look at the reality, yes, but you have to think what you want the reality to be. And you can only achieve the reality that you want by following the principles that you believe in. And if you start abandoning the principles, then you're not going to get a society that you believe in and that you want. You're not going to have a society where pensioners are able to heat their homes if you keep doing things like, cutting them into fuel allowance, and then you break the triple lock. You're not going to have a society where people are able to earn money if you don't invest in innovation and you don't invest in growth. So it's a balance between the two. You have to look at the sort of society you want. We had it's 15 years ago now, we had a slogan, and I don't like political slogans, but this one for me summed up exactly what you should want for society, and it was a stronger economy and a fairer society. And the reason for having a strong economy is to have a fair society. So if you start throwing out all the things that make your society fair, where is the point in having a strong economy?
Well, you can keep the principles, right? You can keep the principles.
Protect people's rights.
Yeah, you keep the principles. I mean, the pensioners triple lock was a good idea at the time. It brought pensioners back up to parity. It's sort of done its job, and it's now pushing pensioners ahead of people in both definitely the private sector and in many cases the public sector as well. So it needs changing. It doesn't need just everything scrapping and throwing baby out with bathwater. I totally agree with you about keeping principles. Workers' rights. Keep workers. We all want workers to have full rights, but it's going too far. This bill's going too far.
And Daniel wasn't saying don't do it. He was saying delay it because we can afford it later. I mean, if you're convinced by his argument or not, it's inside the paper. We're going to have to move on to our final topic, otherwise we don't have time.
Sorry, Christine. I'm sure it was a storming point, but we'll revisit it in all the weeks of speculation we've got in the run up to the budget. Yeah, we'll delay it, exactly. Times change. Sometimes we just need to delay the implementation. We've been discussing this morning Lily Allen's new album, West End Girl, which is getting the sort of critical praise for being a musical, and majestic thing. But it's also been shining a light on open relationships that she has, I was going to say experienced, I'm going to say endured by the sound of it. I think it's a slightly odd phenomenon. So-called ethically non-monogamous dating is on the rise, which sounds like a cheater's charter to me, Paul.
Yeah, it does feel like that when talking about thinking about modern relationships such as they are. I don't know what a modern relationship is compared to any other relationship, but we are then looking at a particular privileged person, with all of the money, the legal and illegal stimulants that are around them. I did look at the article. I was slightly surprised about the juxtaposition of her relationship and all the infidelities and all the things that were around it, through to having delicious snacks of honey Dijon kettle crisps that were fueling the making of the album in the Times article there.
Yeah.
But I think the only changes I've seen from normal people with modern relationships is online dating and changes their expectation when they're settling down and having children. But I'm not sure we can what the learning is of one particular relationship.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Christine, that's a fair point, isn't it? Everything is unique. I'm sort of clinging to the old-fashioned definition of what, marriage should be, in the way that it is two people who are supposed to be in love.
I think the definition hasn't changed, which is why you have the caveat of open marriage, which to me doesn't make sense whatsoever.
In terms.
That's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
You're either married or you're in an open relationship. You can't have both, because if you're married, you are by definition married to one person. So
Yes.
it's not an open relationship. So the whole thing mystifies me. I'm probably showing my age, but it does completely mystify me. Relationships are difficult. Whatever kind of relationship you're involved in, they're not easy. They're not tough. So in many ways, it does seem to me like a cop-out. I'll just have open relationships and non-monogamous ones, and then I won't have to work at it. And that's maybe me, as I say, showing my age, but I don't think it works.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
There was a conversation that some of my friends were having, and someone suggested, I've been thinking about suggesting to my wife of 4 years that we open our relationship.
Really?
And the horror that I sort of felt, and the betrayal, actually, that would be even for someone to raise that as a question, because to me it flies completely in the face of the promises and the commitments that you made, and the legal commitments you made, hopefully in front of your friends and family to support you, to say you had agreed not to do that for the rest of your life. But I think for young... Carry on,
Sorry,
Christine.
I agree with you, but interestingly, you've just reminded me that I know someone, no names, I'm not identifying them or anything, who has been in a series of open relationships and is now getting married. And they're putting, open relationships and everything behind them in favour of monogamy because they think that is where happiness will lie. And I think, I can't help but think that if you're thinking about an open relationship, it's because the relationship you're in is maybe not right for you.
Yeah.
I think we've moved on, haven't we, from the old traditional stuff from a long time ago when marriages were sort of transactional between two families and passing on wealth and those kind of things.
Yeah.
Human beings crave love, companionship, and that's the sort of default nature of most humans. And so, I'm with you, kind of a traditional, two people relationship, whatever that sexuality is, and that, but two people in a committed relationship.
And if you're craving it and you end up on dating apps, and this is particularly for younger people and younger women who then say, well, yes, okay, well, the men I'm matching with say, well, they'd like to be in one of these sort of ethical, open situations. And some women are saying, okay, well, that would be better than nothing because they feel like the dating world is so miserable out there.
I fundamentally think, and we do have to move on, sorry, I'm ranting a little on this. I do fundamentally think human beings are not wired to cope with that situation. I just don't think you will. I think it speaks to deep-seated unhappiness. I think there will always be jealousy. I think it'll be very difficult to sort of see past how your partner, in inverted commas, is behaving realistically, and I think it will cause more trouble than it's really worth. But hey, you're not here to listen to my thoughts. You're here to listen to Christine and Paul's, for which we're very grateful. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Paul.